Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday, May the 27th, 2021. It is currently 5:45 p.m. Central Time, and I don't know how things are working where you live. I have no idea. But here in West Texas, people are saying school's out for the summer. Yes, today was the last day of school for kids all across West Texas. They're out for the summer. So in many ways, it's the official start of summer, at least here in West Texas. It's about 91 degrees outside right now, so it feels like summer. I don't know how things are going where you are. I don't know if your kids are out of school. I don't know what's going on, but wherever you are, however you may be listening, thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, if you are listening live, feel free to use the little chat icon there on the Spreaker app and say hello, offer your thoughts, ask questions, offer your opinions. We always like to hear that. But yes, I'm coming to you live here from Victory Baptist Church. It is, in a sense, the beginning of summer, and I'm hoping that it's going to be a very productive summer here for the Theology Central podcast. So let me just go ahead and get this out of the way. Let me just go ahead and ask the question, and I don't know how many of you will answer, but feel free to. I want to know what you would like me to talk about this summer. What if you were to write out my programming schedule for the summer of 2021, what would it look like? Do you want more Bible study exercises? Is there a theological subject you want me to explore? Is there a book of the Bible you would like me to start taking apart? What would you like? More work on the VBC Bible Institute? What would you like me to do? What would you like me to cover? And this could be directly here for the podcast. It may impact the preaching of the church. You tell me what you want. Do you want more episodes during the summer, or do you have a tendency to listen less during the summer? You tell me. I want your feedback. I want your opinions. You can email those to me at newsif@yahoo.com. Do you want more coverage about current events? You tell me what you want. Now, that doesn't mean you'll get exactly what you ask for, but I will definitely take it into consideration and see what I'm capable of doing and producing, and hopefully making it a great summer. I'm hoping this is going to be a good summer for everyone as the country is slowly but surely opening back up. More and more things. I mean, I was watching one of the NBA playoff games last night. The place was packed with people. Wrestling companies are going back on the road. There's just so many things are happening where it shows the country is opening back up. People are traveling. People are going on vacation. A lot of things happening. Yes, gas prices are at a 7-year high. So that's not good. And I do think we're going to see a very long summer when it comes to violence in many parts of the country. But yeah, there's a lot of things to be excited about. But the one thing I would like to do is, no matter what's going on around us, is I want to use this microphone to the best of my ability to try to produce content that you want to hear for this summer of 2021. So by all means, let me know what you're thinking, how you see it, what you would like to hear, what I can do for you spiritually. Maybe it's the summer of 2021. You're like, man, spiritually, you are in a mess. Well, tell me what I can do, and I will do everything I can to try to assist and help you. But as always, as much as possible, as I can, almost every day, I will be right here behind this microphone. Well, just kind of living life with you. I'm living life right here behind a microphone, talking about things, hopefully in the most real, organic, honest, transparent way that I can, and hopefully you will benefit from it. But I know what we're going to do today. I know what we're going to do. What time is it? It's 5:49 p.m. Central Time. So what we're going to do on this Thursday evening is we're going to turn back to Psalm chapter 2. I did a Bible study exercise on Psalm chapter 2, and already Twyla, now you're becoming familiar with her name, Twyla already started doing work on Psalm chapter 2, and she's doing that when her mother is in the hospital. So even though she's in a kind of a difficult situation, she still made time to focus in on Psalm chapter 2. She sent me all of her notes. I think it was this morning when I received the message. And they look great. We'll probably use some of her notes and work through some of them at some point. But let me just kind of remind you of what's in Psalm 2. I'm going to give you I kind of gave you a preliminary outline, an outline that you could use to develop your own or to work on or to even copy. And I'm going to remind you of a section there where there's a lot of questions we need to answer. And then we're going to listen to, I just picked up the Edify Christian podcast app and started looking for random messages on Psalm chapter 2 and grabbed the first one. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to listen to it and see how they handle the text. But let's do this first. I move all of my stack of books here. Let's open up this Bible, Psalm chapter 2. This is my normal preaching Bible, Psalm chapter 2. Has no notes, doesn't have anything in it. It's actually my Bible study Bible as well, because I don't like Bibles with notes or anything in them. But Psalm chapter 2, are you ready? Psalm chapter 2, remember there are 12 verses in Psalm chapter 2. Let me read this to you. Here we go. Thinking caps on. Let's do a quick review and let's see if we can advance this a little bit. All right, here we go. Psalms chapter 2, the book of Psalms, Psalm chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. Now, there's a lot going on here. So already I want to stop, but I'm going to try to back up and read. I'm going to go back to verse 4 again. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. Oh, there's so much going on in those verses. There's so much. Even reading it doesn't even feel like I'm doing justice to it, because there is so much going on. And I was trying to emphasize certain parts, but there is Psalm chapter 2. Now let's remind you just briefly of the outline I suggested. And remember, Bible study exercise, I'm doing this. I do this in a way where I'm just not trying to teach you. I'm trying to make you a part of it. So I try to teach it in a way where I'm not really teaching. I'm kind of suggesting. I'm trying, in many cases, come across like I don't know the answer, because I'm trying to get you involved in the process. But here is the suggested outline I came up with. All right, Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. We have the attitudes of the inhabitants of earth. We have the attitudes of humans, right? And we see those attitudes. Psalm chapter 2, verse 1. Why do the heathen rage? We have rage. And the people imagine a vain thing. We have vain imaginations. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. What do we have? We have these attitudes of rage, we have the attitude of vain imaginations, and we have the attitude of rebellion right there in those passages. And you can look at the different groups of individuals that are mentioned there. Look in Psalm chapter 2, you have the heathen, you have the people, you have the kings, and you have the rulers. Right? So you have different groups of people who inhabit the earth, different humans, different groups of humans, and you have their attitudes clearly spoken of, clearly demonstrated there. That's Psalm chapter 2. That's verses 1 through 3. We called this the attitudes of humans, or the attitudes of the inhabitants of the earth. Then verses 4 through 9, we have, in a sense, the reaction of God. God's reaction to these attitudes. And look, we see this starting in verse 4. He that sitteth in the heavens, and let me take this back. Remember, I changed my outline because I said the reaction of God, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, that may be offering too much of an interpretation. So I backtracked, and remember, I changed it to the reaction of him who sitteth in the heavens. And the reason I did that is to demonstrate to you that when you do your outline, make sure your outline does not include an interpretation, just observation. The passage simply defines the person or the individual here that's giving that we're reading about their reaction to the attitudes of those on the earth as he that sitteth in the heavens. All right? He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Right? Now, there's a lot. I mean, I think we can understand that that's referring to God, but we just want to be very careful that our outline only contains observations. All right? And that goes from 4 all the way down to 9. All right? 4 to 9. Then, so number 1 in our outline, the attitudes of the inhabitants of the earth, or the attitudes of humans, verses 1 through 3. The reaction of him who sitteth in the heavens, verses 4 through 9. And then you have the instructions, verses 10 through 12. Note what happened here in Psalm chapter 2. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish from the way. All right? You have these clear instructions given, and we have these instructions going from verse 10 to 12. Right? So we have the attitudes, we have the reaction, and we have the instructions. And then we have the promise in verse 12, the end of verse 12, blessed are all they that put their trust in him. So our outline goes, number 1, the attitudes of the inhabitants of the earth, verses 1 through 3. The reaction of him who sitteth in the heavens, verses 4 through 9. The instructions, verses 10 through 12. The promise, verse 12. That, I should say, is the outline suggested, and you could build from that and manipulate it and change it. I just presented it to you. Now, a couple of things I gave you to do. One of those things was to go through the New Testament and find every New Testament reference to Psalm chapter 2, whether it was a direct quote, whether it was just an allusion to, and then figure out how the New Testament is using those sections of Psalm chapter 2. Remember, that was something else I told you to do. And then, one of the most important assignments is in Psalm chapter 2, starting in verse 4 to 9. Psalm chapter 2, verses 4 through 9, you need to figure out who is speaking and to whom are they speaking. Let me demonstrate. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. The he in verse 5 has to be the one sitting in heaven. It has to be the Lord. I think that makes sense. Who is he speaking to? He's speaking to the them has to be the individuals found in verses 1, 2, and 3. All right, I think that makes sense. Then verse 6, yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. All right, who is speaking? Yet have I set my king. That has to be the one sitting in heaven, right? So the one sitting in heaven, if we understand that to be God, the Lord, right, then he has set a king upon Zion. Who is this king? Is it David? Is it Hezekiah? Is it Christ? How would you justify your answer? Verse 7, I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me. Now, who's speaking in verse 7? It has to be the king who's set upon the hill, right? Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Verse 7 has to be, who is speaking there, has to be the king who is upon the hill. Is that David, Hezekiah, or Christ? Right? What do we do with that? Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thy inheritance. All right, who's speaking? That has to be the one sitting in heaven is telling the king, ask of me, and I'll give the heathen for your inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. And then verse 9, thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in a piece like a potter's vessel. Verse 9 has to be the one sitting in heaven speaking to the king that he is going to put on the hill of Zion. Has to be that it's the Lord sitting in heaven speaking to the king in verse 9. That seems to be the way you have to understand it. So you've got to figure out who is speaking and to whom are they speaking. Very important you do just that. All right. That's 15 minutes of review. All right. So much we could talk about there, but I'm going to keep one of the reasons again, the way you learn is through repetition. So the review is there to help you, to make you go back over it, to make you look at the chapter again. The more times you look at it, the more it will become a part of you and you really will start learning it. All right. Now we say all of that. Now what we're going to do, I want to do some teaching right there. I want to do some teaching, but I'm going to say, I kind of did a little teaching there. I started working through who is speaking and to whom are they speaking in verses 4 through 9. So I did extend a little bit there. Now what we're going to do is I just went to the Edify Christian Podcast app, put Psalm chapter 2, hit episodes, found the first sermon, and here it is. Are you ready? It's more of it like a devotional message. It's only 19 minutes long, but I thought I would start with a short one, and we'll see if this adds to our understanding, confuses our understanding, how they interpret this as David, Hezekiah, Christ, if they offer justification. Let's see how they handle the text. Let's see what kind of hermeneutic they use, and let's see what we can learn. Are you ready? All right, thinking caps on. Here we go.
But I want to look at Psalm 2 tonight. So let's start by reading it together. It says, why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh, and the Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now, therefore, be wise, O kings. Be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all those who put their trust in him. Now, tonight, with this little time in the psalm, we're going to briefly delve into one of the great secrets of history. And this secret is a conspiracy theory, letting you know up front, and it's a conspiracy theory within a conspiracy theory. We look at Psalm 2 and we learn about a global conspiracy theory that is behind all world governments, all institutions, all centers of power, but we're also going to learn about a counter conspiracy theory. It's hidden within the conspiracy theory, but it's higher, it goes deeper. A secret government that is above and over all governments, all seats of power in this world. So as we go through Psalm 2, I want to treat it in 4 sections. The first section of this psalm, found in verses 1 through 3. And if you were to subtitle this section of Psalm 2, you could call it The Powerful Rage and Plot. The Powerful Rage and Plot.
All right, now what's interesting? He broke it into 4 parts, Remember our outline? We broke it into 4 parts. Now, why do I point this out? Very important, just to please understand this. There are some sections of Scripture that when you just read it 3, 4, 5 times, 5 times is the minimum. You should always read a passage before you engage in study of it. But if you read a passage 5 times, if you read Psalm 2, and if I keep saying Psalm 4, I apologize just because we spent so much time in Psalm 4. But if you read Psalm 2 5 times, I think you're going to see the natural division in the text. It's very easy to outline. Sometimes when you're studying a psalm or a proverb or certain passage, it just doesn't break into a natural outline. And then you have to work and try to put it into some kind of an outline form. This one is super easy. Psalm 2 is a great psalm when people first learn the chapter summary method of Bible study. Psalm 2 is a great one to hand it to them because it's so easy to outline it. It's so easy. He breaks it into 4 parts. He calls the powerful rage and plot. Okay, that's fine. The reason I went with the inhabitants of the earth or humans is because it speaks of, at least in the King James, the heathen, the people, the kings, and the rulers. So to me, the kings and the rulers are the powerful. The heathen and the people just seem to refer to the average people, the people of the nations, not necessarily the powerful. So I wanted to capture both. That's why I called it the inhabitants of the earth or the humans, because it seems to deal with all kinds of people from different positions, whether rulers or just your average person. That's the reason I went a little different in my outline. All right, but let's see how he handles the rest of this. Here we go.
And this section describes the universal, the historic conspiracy that is now in place and will continue. Now, who are the participants in this conspiracy? It's all who hold power in this world. Verse 2, he calls them the kings. He calls them the rulers. Verse 10, they're the kings and the judges. Don't limit yourself to thinking only of civil governmental power. This can be places of academic power, intellectual power, financial power.
Now that's interesting. He just reduces this to people of power. I'm gonna look at something really quick. That's an interesting approach. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna look at Psalm 2:1 in like every English translation on the planet and see if there's a reason why he just reduces it just to the powerful. All right. Okay. The New International. Psalm 2:1. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The New Living Translation. Why are the nations so angry? Why do they waste their time with futile plans? The ESV. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? So I believe verse 1 gives us more than just the people of power. It's not just the people in power. It's the people themselves. It's the nations. It's the people. It's the citizens. It's the kings. It's everyone. Everyone on earth has this attitude of rage, vain imaginations, and rebellion. I think it's not just in the people of power. I don't know if I would reduce it to just the people of power. I think that's... You can tell, once again, that's why we do these Bible study exercises. I think it encompasses people of power and average people. I think it encompasses both.
Cultural, social power. Well, where are they from? All nations, in all places. Verse 1 says, the nations rage. Verse 8 describes the scope of it. It says, it is to the ends of the earth, these nations, these places. And that is the participants, where they're from. What is this conspiracy doing? What are they?
Now, please note, the nations, though, don't include just the kings and the rulers. The nations include all the people in them. So I don't know why he would just reduce it to people of power. I don't know why he would do that. I disagree with that. I think that undermines the psalm, the scope of the psalm. It's telling you everyone has these attitudes of rage, vain imaginations, and rebellion against the one who sitteth in heaven.
Up to simply, they unite to gain independence from the Lord. and his anointed. They are uniting to gain independence from the Lord and his anointed. That's code word, anointed, for Messiah or Christ. It's all the same term. So verse 2 shows this. It says, the rulers take counsel together. Verse 3, they want to break their bonds, cast away their cords or their shackles. And so this joint secret forum where they meet and plan, it is both active, it's intentional, and it is revolutionary. They are trying to overthrow what they consider to be bondage.
Now, I like the way he stated that. The people here are basically seeking independence from the Lord and his anointed. All right. They're seeking independence from the one who sitteth in heaven. Now, we can just stop right here and offer a very practical lesson, an application that you could write down in your notebook. And that is, in what ways in your Christian life have you sought, even though you claim to be a Christian, even though you go to church, in what ways have you tried to in what ways have you lived your life independent to what God says in his word and what the scriptures say? In what ways have you, now you're going to say, no, I always submit to God. There are areas of your life where you still live independent of what God says. You know you do, and I do. In what ways have you sought independence from God's word? In what ways have you wanted to declare independence? This subject, I can relate to it in some ways. I was born on March the 2nd, Texas Independence Day, the day that Texas declared their independence from Mexico, even though we still had not won the battle. In fact, the siege of the Alamo was still underway when we decided to declare our independence, even though we were going to have to win that war to ultimately secure that independence. But it's just kind of, hey, we're declaring our independence. Okay, now hopefully we'll win this battle we lost the Battle of the Alamo, as you well know. But then later on, obviously, remember the Alamo was the battle cry, and we ultimately won. But I understand this idea of fighting for one's independence. But I bet you in your life and my life, there are ways in which we fight to be independent of what God says in his word. And what ways, and really do this, take the time to think of some ways, some times in your life where you tried to live, and not just tried, you did live independent of what God says. And then look for some ways that maybe currently in your life, you're still struggling to gain that independence from God's word. You want to break asunder. You want to throw off any restrictions, any of his commandments. We all have a tendency to do it because, you know why? Inside of our heart, inside of you is a sinful nature. And guess what that sinful nature does? It rages against God. It has vain imaginations, and it is rebellious. That is the very heart of our sinful nature. So I think it's a good time to stop and meditate on how that's been evident in your life and how it may be evident right now. All right, let's continue.
From the Lord. So now, where we live today, where we are living and functioning and processing news and articles and commentary, we're presented with a competing narrative to this secret, this conspiracy that I'm giving you. The lens by which to interpret the problems and the needs of this world, we're always being broadcast something. It's a subtext in what we read in the news and in commentary. But here is the real narrative. Here's the real narrative. The places of power, whether it's governmental, whether it's institutional, whether it's commercial, they all are demanding independence from the demands of God. They want independence from the demands of his Son, Jesus Christ. For instance,
let me stop right here. Now, Christians love to do this. We always like to say they want independence from God. We love to talk about the theys, don't we? We love to talk about them. We like to talk about they. How about us? Everyone, I don't know if he was preaching this in front of a live audience, but if he was, everyone sitting in those pews, guess what? They have that same mentality inside of them. It's called the sinful nature. It never goes away. There's always a part of every Christian who still wants to fight for that independence from God. The only difference is we don't say it that way. We cover up our rebellion. We cover up our wanting to live independent of God's word. and we cover it up and try to sound spiritual. We try to say it the right way. We try to offer our spiritual justification. But we're just as rebellious. We are. It's deep inside of us. It's a part of our sinful nature. So I'm never the one to go they and them. I'm always about us and me, all right? Because that's where we always have to start.
Russia does not want the Lord and his Christ to control her. China does not want the Lord and his Christ to control her. America does not want the Lord and his Christ to control her. The system, socialism, does not want the Lord and his Christ to control it. Bare capitalism does not want the Lord and his Christ to control it. Amazon does not want the Lord and his Christ to control it. And neither does J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest bank in America. In fact,
neither does most churches. Neither does most Christians. I don't know why we always somehow they don't want Christ to rule over them. And we do. We want Christ to do for us. We want Christ to save us. We want Christ to bless us. We want Christ to help us. We want Christ to provide for us. But we ultimately don't want him to rule over us because we constantly do that which he tells us not to do, pursue that which he tells us not to pursue, and partake of that which he tells us not to partake. You do it and I do it all the time. So look, it's the heart of all people. He's reducing this to just the people in charge out there. They don't want God, but thank goodness the rest of us does. And it's like, what are you talking about? Look at the American church. Look at your life. Look at my life. Look at your family's life. Okay. All right, let's continue.
In fact, every one of these governments, systems, or powers actively conspires against Christ's dominion if it does not explicitly and overtly submit itself to the Son. So you have to bring this understanding, this lens, to the foreground of your thinking whenever you hear news, whenever you hear commentary, because otherwise you're swallowing propaganda. If you don't believe that this conspiracy that I'm describing, that Psalm 2 describes, exists, you will not be able to discern the times. So now let's turn to the second section, verses 4 through 6. The second section of the psalm is found there. And
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, he breaks the second section down from verses 4 through 6, and I broke it down from 4 through 9. That's interesting. I got it 4 through 6. He broke it down 4 through 9. All right, so now we have a different approach. Let's see what he does here, and you can determine if you agree with the 4 through 6 approach or the 4 through 9 approach. All right, let's see how he handles this, and let's see what he calls this section.
if you were to subtitle this section, you would call it "The Lord Laughs and Enthrones." The Lord laughs and enthrones.
All right, the Lord laughs and enthrones. Again, I call this the reaction of him that sitteth in the heavens, because that's how verse 4 begins. He does enthrone, so that's good that he includes that. But he stops it all at verse 6. That's interesting. I wonder if he stops in verse 6 because verse 7, we have a change in speaker. That may be why. That may be why. So we may need to change our outline. See, that's why you constantly study and restudy and listen and re-listen to everything you can to find about a passage of Scripture, constantly challenging the way you're thinking. I think maybe he's onto something here. Let's see what he does.
Contrast in these two sections what the human powers and systems are doing with what the Lord is doing. In verses 1 and 2, the human systems, the human powers conspire, rage, plot. They are churning. They are trying to overthrow. In verse 4, what's the Lord doing? He just laughs. He laughs. Verse 6, that's in verse 4. And then in verse 6, he enthrones. Quite a contrast. Let's look at the Lord's laughter. Verse 4 says that from heaven, looking at this global multinational conspiracy that's set against him. The Lord sees it all, and he just laughs. He is not bothered. He's above it all. He's seated in heaven, it says, and he in no way feels or is threatened by it. Here's the picture of it. It's like if you were looking at a kindergarten class, the kindergartners and the teacher. And the kindergartners are unhappy. They are unhappy because nap time is coming, and they do not want to have nap time imposed on them. So the children huddle. They come up with a best brilliant plan to overthrow the nap mandate. And here's what they're saying. They're saying, I don't want a nap. Yeah, I don't want a nap either. What are we going to do? I've got an idea. What's the idea? So 5-year-old, when it's nap time, let's burp. Let's burp together. And they all say, yeah, that's a great idea. That's our plan. Yes. So the teacher sees this plotting, hears this plotting. Is the teacher threatened by this plotting? Not at all. Not at all. The teacher laughs. The nap mandate will stand. Let's look at the Lord's response to the conspiracy. He has a higher and a deeper conspiracy of his own that will cover all of it and dominate it. In the face of this global rebellion, God is going to enthrone another power, his son, to be king over all. He's basically saying, you all are kings. But in verse 6, he says, I have set my king. So Christ is to be king over all the powers.
All right, now, he's doing a very good job, and I'm glad that I'm listening to this right now, because he does really emphasize the setting up of this king in verse 6, which I did not emphasize sufficient enough in my Bible study exercise. So he is helping kind of mold and basically help me reshape what I did ultimately to make it better. He's in a sense purging out some of the flaws that I made, and that's why you listen. You have to constantly listen and listen and listen and listen, and that constantly learn, because whatever you think you knew, see, what I thought I knew yesterday or what I emphasized yesterday wasn't perfectly. I missed something here. We needed to spend more time emphasizing this fact. Who is this king that he is setting up? Now, a couple of interesting things. Number one, he goes just full-blown presupposition, this is Christ. He doesn't entertain the idea that this could be David, that this could be Hezekiah. He doesn't even bother to ask that question. He doesn't. So in a roundabout way, you would almost say that Psalm 2 is written, that the way you would interpret Psalm 2 is Psalm 2 had nothing to do with what anybody was going through during that time, because this is Psalm 2 is looking to a future time, right? Now this gets into an interesting question. All right, here's an important interpretive question, and this is going to deal with eschatology. All right, so if we go with this, all right, so I'm going to really try to flesh this out a little more. He's doing a good job of bringing it to our attention. Now I'm going to take what he did and then try to extend this discussion even further to really get your thinking cap, to really get you thinking, and to really force you to put your thinking cap on. All right, are you ready? Here we go. Now, here's the question. Let's go with his interpretation. Let's say his interpretation is right. So, Psalm chapter 2, you have earthly power who's plotting against God. God is in heaven. His response is to laugh, and he says, okay, kings, you're trying to rebel against me. I'm going to place my king upon my holy hill of Zion. And let's say that king there is Christ. So this is God the Father responding to the rebellion of powerful people on earth by saying, I have placed my king on the holy hill. And this is my son, Jesus Christ. Now, question. Is he referring to placing Christ in charge of a spiritual kingdom? Hey, you're going to rebel, but I have a king above a spiritual kingdom? Or is this prophecy looking forward to a time where Christ will literally rule and reign from Jerusalem? Do you interpret this as Christ ruling and reigning over a spiritual kingdom? Or do you have this, do you believe this is referring to Christ ruling and reigning over an earthly kingdom? If it's an earthly kingdom, then the one school of eschatology would say that's the millennial kingdom. If it's a spiritual kingdom, then that means Christ is ruling and reigning right now over that spiritual kingdom. So if you interpret this to be Christ, you still have to answer the next question. Is this Christ ruling over a spiritual kingdom or over a literal kingdom? How does the text read? Spiritual or literal? And just remember, this would have nothing to do. So for the people back then, you'd be like, okay, I don't know how they would have understood it. Would they have understood that this is referring to the coming Messiah? Maybe they would have understood it as a messianic psalm, and that this is pointing to the Messiah. Is this the reason why they were looking for Christ to come and rule and reign at an earthly kingdom in the first coming, and they missed the fact that that's not what he was supposed to do? And is this now fulfilled in the spiritual kingdom, or is this prophecy going beyond his first coming to his second coming, and a literal second coming where he sets up a literal kingdom in ruling and reigning from Jerusalem? You've got to ask yourself, you got to ask these questions, and you've got to answer these questions. Let's see which way he goes with this. Is he going to go spiritual kingdom, or is he looking for a future earthly? I have a feeling he's probably going to look at it more from an Amil perspective and say Christ is ruling and reigning now through his church. We'll see. I could be wrong.
Of this earth. And you have to picture this whenever you're hearing, processing, responding to, worried about the news, the powers that be. Christ will be king over Russia, over China, over America, over socialism, over capitalism, over Amazon, etc. Wow. You might be thinking, Christ over commerce, over culture. You might be thinking, that sounds so fundamentalist. Now, what I'm talking about is not an ideology. This passage tells us ultimately a person, not an ideology, is going to prevail. Going to be a person, not a system of thought, and not a system of thought that we or religious people are trying to impose. The passage tells us that the Lord is setting over all of these powers and all of these systems the person Christ, his son, overall. Well, what will that look like? Are we talking about electing Christians to political offices, hoping Christians will be installed as CEOs and vice presidents in key institutions? That's not what we're talking about here. Let's turn to the next section. The second section of the psalm was verses 4 through 6. The third section is in verses 7 through 9. And if you were to subtitle this section, you could call it, "The Lord Promises All Nations to Christ." The Lord promises all nations to Christ. So,
all right, so okay, it sounds like he was saying, he wasn't explicit there. I guess he's going to do in the next section how this is going to look, how this is going to play out. So it's Christ. If this is the king, it's not David, it's not Hezekiah, it's actual Christ. That's the king that he put upon. I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. If this is referring to a spiritual kingdom, then he's ruling and reigning right now. He's ruling and reigning right now. And so I think that this is still a part of the ultimate reaction, right? I think this is a reaction. I think what you have is the reaction of, I still think this is a reaction. He breaks it, verse 7 and 9, down into a different section, and he says that the Lord will give a people or give the nations to the Son. I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but you get the idea. So I don't think he's going to emphasize the change of speaker here. I think he's just going to emphasize that the Lord is going to give the heathen, give the nations to his Son. He's going to emphasize that. Well, when is he going to do that? Is he doing that now through the church? Or are you looking at a literal fulfillment on earth. How do you understand this? Let's see where he goes here.
In verse 7, what we have here now is a secret recording of this deeper conspiracy. One of those, it's like those hidden recorders that gets leaked later on. The recording reveals that the conspirators of this deeper conspiracy have been planning something. They've been talking to one another. And verse 7 says, here are the conspirators. Verse 7 says, you are my son, says one voice. You're begotten of me. The other speaker in this recording is the Son. So it's a father and a son in this deeper conspiracy. Verse 8, the Father says, ask of me, ask of me. Those three words, ask of me, you have tapped in this verse into one of the most mysterious doctrines in Scripture. We call it, the technical term for this is the covenant of redemption. This is not the covenant of works. This is not the covenant of grace. This is the Father asking a son, what do you want for your birthday, my begotten one?
Okay, now, he does acknowledge there's two speakers, the Father and the Son. Now, that's going with the presupposition and the assumption that the Son here is Jesus, not David, not Hezekiah. So he's not proven that, but he's going with this idea. And now here's the communication, and now the Father is asking the Son, ask of me. Hey, ask of me, and I will give thee the heathen for thy inheritance and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Now, again, if how do we understand this? If it's a spiritual kingdom, how does this work? Hey, the Father's telling the Son, ask of me, and I'll give the earth, the uttermost parts of the earth for your possession. When is Christ going to possess the uttermost parts of the earth? In a spiritual way or a literal way? Right? Literal or spiritual? Spiritual, then it doesn't really have any ultimate meaning other than, well, people will get saved. Literal, Christ will rule and reign from Jerusalem for 1,000 years in what's known as the millennial reign. Then it takes on a more physical dimension, a more tangible dimension. So a lot of questions here to ask yourself and to try to figure out. Let's see if he offers any clear explanation of which way he's going to go. He's only got like a couple of minutes left here.
What do you want for your birthday? Verse 8 says, if you ask me, the Father to the Son, man is not in the picture. If you ask me, I will give you all the nations. Verses 8 and 9 tell us that when the Son gets this gift, what's he going to do with it? Set it on a shelf? Frame it? Put it on the wall? It says he's going to gain full possession of an inheritance and eliminate all resistance to his taking the full possession of the inheritance. It's a picture of victory, a picture of utter domination. Now, we might feel uncomfortable with this idea of, whoa, total control, domination, destruction of enemies. But just think about it just a little bit. One thing that helps us tap into the rightness of that is our own current polarized times. You can pick any topic that's a hot topic right now. Elections or election fraud, masking, anti-masking, whatever. For some of these topics, we all have picked some kind of side where we've been able. Now, be honest about this. You do want your side to win. You want your side to dominate and eliminate and shut down the wrong side. That's not a bad desire if what you want is good and what you're against is evil. But our challenge might be, in our hot topics of today, our challenge might be that we have, for some of the topics, we may have too much certainty and not enough knowledge. Not everything is knowable. We're fallen and we're limited and we're just limited by what we hear and what we don't hear. But this much is certain and is right. Christ must and will have total domination over all powers. God has given it. Christ will take it from the Father. Christ will enact it. So verse 8 says, you, Christ, shall break them. Now, this is why I'm saying this is not an ideology, and we're not just trying to get people into positions of power or get people into office. We, the people of the earth, the created humans, we mere humans are to pursue peace with all men, we're to pursue justice, and we're to let the rulers wield the sword. But Christ, the person, not an ideology, Christ will take his dominion. Christ, the person, not the ideology, Christ, the acting, living Son, will bring his rod of iron to bring submission. What is that rod of iron? Well, he may use believers, but he may also use unbelievers. He may use viruses. He may use vaccines. He may use masks and distancing, or he may use the deaths of millions of people. He will have his way to subdue the nations and the powers of this earth. Christ the person, not the ideology, Christ the person will act and prevail using his rod of iron. So
I'm trying to follow the eschatology here. So he's going to subdue the earth through using viruses, death, unbelievers, believers. So is this teaching that ultimately Christ is going to subdue the earth and to just usher in the kingdom? Is this a post-millennial? I'm a little perplexed here. Revelation 19 would give us some idea of maybe exactly how it would occur. Revelation chapter 19. If you go to Revelation chapter 19, we'll go to verse 13. Verse 12, his eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself, and he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon a white horse, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, and out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he comes and lays destruction and destroys and breaks and takes dominion. And then in Revelation 20, you have the establishment of what many would refer to as the millennial kingdom. That doesn't seem saying that he's going to do so through that seems like a very supernatural coming down from heaven with the armies of heaven on a horse with a sword, and to subdue and destroy, in a sense, to take back the earth. And then Christ will sit upon the throne, and then the earth will be his possession. And the as Psalm chapter 2 says, ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thy inheritance. He will be ruling and reigning over everyone. So I'm a little perplexed. He's not really articulating exactly. He seems to be saying he's subduing the earth now. He's subduing it now in a tangible way. He's not subduing it now. The world is still raging in vain imaginations and trying to break asunder and declare their independence from God. He's not doing it now. Now, through the gospel, you can change that a little bit, but the human nature is still there. So I'm a little perplexed. He's not really articulating exactly how this plays out. If that is Christ, and this is not referring to David, not referring to Hezekiah, and this is all speaking of Christ, then either it's done spiritually, which means it has no real, true, tangible, nothing really tangible. It's just kind of a spiritual concept. Or if it's done literally, then you've got to figure out in your eschatology how that's going to play out. And I think Revelation 19 and 20, if we take that in a literal sense, it would make some sense, I guess. I don't know. All right, let's continue.
You who are followers of Christ, did you realize that Jesus is the most dangerous man in history? He is both the rescuer of the weak and the oppressed, and he's also the most dangerous man in the world. Now, let's look at the fourth and the last section briefly, verses 10 through 12. Let me just boil it down into two simple questions. First of all, do you hold any kind of earthly power? Are you over people, either in a family or in an organization, whether it's small or large? Are you some kind of influencer, maybe online or in person? Verse 10, that's what's in view here. Are you some sort of king or judge, an authority? If so, if you hold some kind of earthly power, this verse is telling you, abandon the conspiracy. Abandon the conspiracy. Verse 11, serve the Lord with fear. Rejoice with trembling. Abandon the conspiracy and join the deeper conspiracy. The Son will have his way. So don't use your power and your influence primarily for keeping profit. Don't use your position and influence primarily for increasing prestige for yourself. Don't use your power and influence primarily for keeping and retaining power. Now, secondly, do you lack earthly power? Do you lack earthly power? What if you're small and without power? You're without influence. Well, you're called in this chapter to laugh and to love. You're called to laugh and to love. Verse 4, the Lord laughs at the powerful and at their conspiracy. You can laugh with the Lord. The battle's the Son's battle. It's not your battle. It's the Son's battle. Yes, he might use you in a significant way, but he might not use you. He is the key player in all this. Who knows what he will use? So you can laugh with the Lord. But you're also called to love. Verse 12, it says, kiss the Son. Kiss the Son. Where in the Bible do love and kisses for this Son come together? Where in the Bible do love and kisses for this Son come together? One place, Luke 7, when the notorious woman, known for her moral failure, came to Jesus. It says in Luke 7, starting at verse 44. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? She has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You, Simon, gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. Verse 47, he says, therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. So in the great reversal in the gospel, Jesus was struck with this rod of iron so that you could be saved. Jesus was broken by the rod of iron and the cross of wood so that your sins could be forgiven. So join the higher and the deeper conspiracy of the Father and the Son. Laugh with the Father. Love the Son.
I don't really know what to do with that. It's one of those things that like it sounds so good and spiritual, but it really has no tangible meaning. So the Son is just, he's going to ultimately bring everything into submission, but when, how? So things are going to get better and better and better and better and better. And then the kingdom is just going to show up, because my understanding, things are going to get worse, worse, and worse. And the only way that is going to be fulfilled in a literal, like either it's got to be fulfilled in a spiritual way, which then it really has no tangible meaning, but in a meaningful way, the heavens are going to have to split open. Christ is going to have to descend on a white horse with a sword, and it's going to be death and destruction, and he's going to break and rule the people with a rod of iron, and then the heathen will be his possession, and all the earth will be the heathen will be his inheritance, and the earth will be his possession as he rules and reigns for 1,000 years. That I don't know how else. Either that's doesn't mean anything. It just means, well, Christ, what Christ is going to do, he's going to rule and reign over the church, and we're going to go out and preach the gospel, and then that will bring people in. It brings some of the people into submission. So it's just, it doesn't have any real tangible meaning. Hey, kings of the earth, I want you to realize, hey, you're going to rule, you're going to do all this crazy stuff, but I'm going to put my king here over a spiritual heaven, and then people are going to preach, and people are going to get saved, and they're going to come into that spiritual heaven, and that's my response to you, is you won't be able to stop that. Now, again, in its physical and its historical context, would that refer to David and Hezekiah and over what the people were doing? You could grab a Bible dictionary and read about the reign of Hezekiah if you want, and see if that would be applicable. You could read about the reign of David. Maybe it would be applicable there as well. But if it's Christ, I don't know how. The only way that seems to make sense is it would be something tangible. And it's just interesting that Revelation 19, some of that same language is referenced. So you can look at it. You can tell me what you think. His outline's kind of interesting there, but I think there's some clear instructions there. And then I think there's that clear promise of blessing there at the end that he did not account for. So there you have it. There's more I want to say, but we're already at an hour, I think. Are we at an hour? Yes, we're at an hour. So I'm just going to wrap it up. Continue to work on Psalm chapter 2. From everything I've said, from everything you've heard, from all of this kind of back and forth commentary, if you've got some questions, make sure you email them to me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. If you're participating in the Bible study, by all means, send it to me, newsif@yahoo.com. Members of Victory Baptist Church, you can share it in the chat like Twyla has, and I really appreciate Twyla being such a major encouragement with the Bible study exercises, because it makes it, look, if there's just one person out there doing the Bible study exercises, then that makes it worth it, all right? So, because I'm going to continue doing them. So, that I think that was beneficial, because it does show you that, hey, if you say this is Christ, there's a lot of questions you have to answer. See, if you say it's not Christ, then you've got your own challenges there. But once you say it's Christ, you've got some big questions to answer. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how everyone approaches this chapter. That's Psalm chapter 2. Thank you for listening. Everyone have a great evening. God bless.